There was kind of a big Venn diagram this month with a lot of books about womanhood and a lot of books featuring elements of magical realism, and those two things kind of coming together. And so I wanted to talk about some of the books and do kind of a reading mashup. I think the first book that I started with was Natural Beauty by Ling Huang. This book is kind of a litfic horror. I was initially interested in it because it sounded like kind of the same concept. The premise and the themes were so similar to Rouge that I had been super disappointed with, unfortunately. Natural Beauty kind of follows a main narrator character. She is an unnamed narrator, and she is a pianist. Her parents had originally immigrated from America to China. For the most part, they made their living through piano, and as a child, the narrator really wants to connect to them through that, even though her parents, they didn't want her to get involved in piano initially because they didn't want the kind of pressure that they had had all throughout their lives, but she's so invested in it and finds so much love with it, and that's really a connection between her and her parents, but mainly her father. Once the narrator gets older, around her college age years, something happens and she ends up working just in the back of a kitchen at a restaurant, washing dishes, and giving up totally on her career as a pianist. One day a woman walks in named Sage, and she actually recognizes her from one of her shows and offers the narrator a job at her business called Holistic. And Holistic is a prestigious beauty and wellness store in town. Our main character's never heard of it because she's not like other girls. She ends up taking the job. She starts working at this beauty and wellness store. There's all these requirements that she is required to follow so that she can uphold their standards of beauty and wellness, and also give accurate recommendations to customers, I suppose. Our main character at one point runs into this woman named Helen, who she's immediately infatuated with. She's this beautiful, blonde, perfect looking woman. The owner is named Victor, and he is really the one who kind of funds the type of innovation and stuff that their store is doing, and Sage is more of like the day-to-day owner. So Victor is actually Helen's uncle, and Helen admits to our narrator that she's been fascinated with her ever since she was a kid. She saw her piano performances on YouTube and would ask Victor to take her to her shows and was a huge fan of her. Helen's kind of best friends with the shift lead character, Lilith. As things progress at Holistic, things start to get stranger and stranger. There's really weird treatments that they're putting them through. Like I said, there's lots of elements of magical realism in this. For example, she wears like a pendant on a chain, and the pendant supposedly notifies her managers and the business owners when she's having like emotional problems and needs like a pick-me-up, which is, don't get me started on that. It's a little bit Severance coded in the like a wellness session type deal. There are some elements of horror in this book. It is magical surrealism type horror, so nothing too gory or anything, but there is a lot of body horror. This is mostly spoiler free, by the way. Like, this is all kind of the setup for what's going to be happening later. The main themes of the book obviously revolve a lot around beauty standards. They revolve mostly around beauty standards for women. At the start of the book, when the narrator starts working at Holistic, she thinks that she's kind of a diversity hire, because everybody else here seems to be kind of like white, blonde, blue-eyed. And over the course of the book, you kind of realize that that's not the case. When the narrator starts working at Holistic, they're really positive about the fact that she's Chinese, and they're really positive about her using her real name, and in fact are encouraging her to basically use her ethnicity to further validify the concepts that they're selling at their store. Even though most of the concepts of the store are Korean, that's obviously not a big concern to the white owners. I rated this book a 4-star, going from having read Rouge and having such a disappointing experience. This kind of redeemed things for me. Something that I really liked about this book was the main character's kind of background story with her parents. I don't know, it was just really great to see like a more positive representation of family, and specifically a positive example of a family. The main character is a child of immigrants. I liked the ending of the book. It was a more positive ending than I was expecting. I really liked the characters in this book too, the side characters. Kind of side characters, Helen and Lilith, as our main characters, but kind of confidants and friends throughout all of this. And they were all at different kind of representations of their beauty and wellness journey. Helen is really in the thick of it with Victor as her uncle. He's always kind of been image and beauty obsessed and pushing that onto his whole family. Lilith is somebody who's worked at Holistic for a long time, so she has undergone kind of a transformation, but she holds a couple things to herself to honor who she is as a person. The only reason this book wasn't really a 5-star for me was maybe this was user error. I didn't really understand how some of the concepts connected. I just didn't really follow what was going on in the ending. Everything seemingly connected together, but I felt like I didn't get enough details to understand what really happened. Okay, so the next book that I finished was Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder. Basically, none of these characters have names. So the main character is referred to as the mother or Nightbitch. She is a stay-at-home mom. She used to be an artist, and when her son was born, she worked and took him to daycare for a while, but eventually ended up quitting her career so that she could be stay at home with him. There's not a lot to say about the son character. He's just like a toddler and he kind of just goes along with everything. The husband character is kind of in and out of the story. For most of his job, he seems to have to travel. For Monday through Friday, he's gone, and then he comes back on the weekends. So the mother's kind of feeling the lack of support from her husband, and she's feeling kind of like the grueling boredom that people will get, especially when they're raising toddler-aged children. And she kind of hits a breaking point one night when the son is crying and the husband is not waking up to help out, and she totally flips out. And going forward, she starts to believe that she is turning into a dog, and she actually has physical effects from this that her husband just kind of writes off because, I don't know, that's just the way that he is. She feels like her canines are getting more pointed. She is growing more hair on the back of her neck and on her arms. She eventually starts like growing a stump, like where a tail would be. As time progresses, she leans more and more into this idea, and she starts raising her son as if they were dogs. Some of the time they act like dogs, and then sometimes she kind of like pulls it together and acts like a mom. This is like furthered by the fact that there's these neighborhood dogs that keep approaching her in the yard and will kind of help babysit the son when the mom's really needing that break. She has this idea that these dogs are the local mommies that kind of go to their library, and she thinks of them as better than her, and kind of like they have it all together and they're so happy being moms. And all of their names are Jen for some reason. This book was so strange, but I just found it really endearing. The book it's kind of like a litfic satirical horror style vibe. There's a lot of focus on the complexities of being a mother and giving up your career. Nightbitch feels so alone because perceived lack of support from her husband, and because of the kind of lack of support in her community as well. She doesn't have a relationship with her family. She is scared of the other gens and really intimidated by them and doesn't want their help. The only way that she can get any help is when these packs of dogs come into her yard and play with her kid. So you really feel like the loneliness and the desperation that Nightbitch is feeling. I ended up rating this book 5 stars. There were some concepts about the mother's childhood that I wish were pulled in earlier in the book, or kind of like slowly threaded through rather than starting out more near the end of the book. I loved the characters. I thought that the mother was so interesting, so funny. She's like an artist, but she's really into performance art and that kind of thing, which is not a world that I've really been interested in the past, but it was super interesting to kind of follow along like her processes and her journey to getting to the performance piece that we kind of end the book with. And I loved the performance piece. Something else that I liked was there was this idea kind of threaded throughout the entire book about magical women and especially magical mothers. There's a book within the book called The Field Guide to Mystical Women, and it's written by an author named Wanda White, and the whole time the character, whenever the mother kind of needs to get something off her chest, she's sending Wanda White these emails that have never been responded to or acknowledged in any way. But she kind of is flipping through this field guide throughout the book, and will kind of land on a little anecdote or story about a type of magical or mystical woman that Wanda White has ran into. Overall, this book was just so crazy in such a good way. The next book that I read was a recommendation from a friend, but she hadn't actually finished reading it by the time that she was like, hey, maybe you should check this book out. And so this book is just an absolute wild ride. It is called Mary by Nat Cassidy. It has a subtitle, Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy. I listened to the audiobook, and in the prologue he kind of apologizes for being a man writing about a woman going through menopause. Which I thought was kind of sweet. This is more of a genre horror. This is not litfic at all. It was kind of out of my realm, but if you kind of stretch the concept, then I would call it magical realism. So our main character is named Mary. The author actually in the prologue kind of described Mary's original concept of Mary was kind of a grown-up Carrie. I totally see it. It's just the way that she is so miserable and downtrodden, just a real sad lady. She's turning 50 in a couple weeks, and at the start of the book gets fired from her job at the bookstore, which she's been working at for 20 years or something. The manager barely even knew her, nobody pays attention to her. She goes back to her house, and you immediately kind of see, okay, Mary's a little bit off her rocker. The only thing really in her house are these, I imagine them as the precious little angels, I don't know, and she calls them her loved ones, and she goes home and she's like, I got fired from my job, and her loved ones are like, no, Mary, that's terrible. Along with the kind of these voices of her loved ones, kind of like a literal angel on her shoulder. She also has a devil on her shoulder called the Undervoice, and it's just this really mean voice in her head that is constantly criticizing her, and is just constantly criticizing her and being really hateful towards her. It seemingly like also tells her to do bad stuff sometimes. I don't know. But the other thing that's going on with Mary is that ever since she hit premenopause, every time she looks in the mirror, she sees her face like decaying horribly. Like warping and decaying and shriveling up and rotting off. And she actually gets this every time that she looks at a woman around her age, like 50 to 60. And it's become kind of an issue in her life because she has to spend a lot of time like avoiding looking at these people and avoiding looking in mirrors and that type of thing. After she's been fired and she's kind of moping at home with her loved ones, her Aunt Nadine calls, and she seemingly hasn't talked to Aunt Nadine in a really long time. And she says that she needs her to come home to help take care of her. Aunt Nadine raised Mary, but also has her own daughter who apparently left town on vacation or something. So Mary goes back to this rural desert town, which she grew up in. It's just immediately bad vibes. The cab driver is like, "Do you have anyone at home missing you?" And she doesn't, I don't know, she doesn't really suspect anything, but even while she's in the cab on the way to Aunt Nadine's, she starts having issues blacking out, and she has a journal that she took with her from the bookstore the day that she was fired, and she's been writing all these weird things in her notebook, like weird gibberish. She's like possessed by a demon or something. So Mary starts helping out with her Aunt Nadine, who is just awful. And so to kind of take her mind off of Aunt Nadine and get a break from her sometimes, she also starts working at the hospital up the hill. The hospital is inside of this like big broken up mansion that's called the Cross House. She learns from her like teenage coworker at the hospital that it's the Cross House because there was a serial killer, Damon Cross, who built this house or lived in this house or something. So that's kind of when the book kicks off. I will say that it was a pretty slow start. As far as themes go, there's a big focus on this particular serial killer. Damon Cross had an issue with women that are the age that Mary is now, and women like her that are childless and unmarried and things like that. So there's a big focus on like the society's hate and disdain towards these types of women and how they go about lashing out at them or just completely ignoring them. I ended up rating this book 2 stars. In my opinion, I think that it just needs like a real good edit. There's all this stuff going on with Mary, you know, she's got the her loved ones, she's got the undervoice in her head, she's got this visual hallucination where she sees these horrible things like happening to herself in the mirror. She goes to this new place where she needs to take care of her aunt, and she's also starting this new job, and at her new job she learns about this serial killer called Damon Cross. And oh, that's the other thing. She's been hallucinating these women around town with like pillowcases over their heads and stuff, and that's been freaking her out, obviously. So she brings it up to her teenage coworker Eleanor, and Eleanor is like, "Oh yeah, those are Damon Cross's victims." And they kind of start their own like little true crime investigation to figure out why Mary is having hallucinations about Damon Cross's victims when she'd never heard of the cases before. So there's that going on just at the start. And as things go forth, there's so many more things introduced. I just felt overwhelmed. The reason that this was 2 stars rather than 1 star is because the book was kind of like so crazy fun and unpredictable because it had no rhyme or reason to the way that it was moving. On top of all that, there was a lot of violence and gore, which are not particularly my favorites, but this is a horror book. The next book that I read was Motherthing, which I just loved, by Ainslie Hogarth, or Hogarth. The main character is named Abby, or Abigail. She is married to her husband, Ralph. Ralph and her had moved in with his mother, and the book starts out with his mother committing suicide. This was less unexpected for them because the reason they moved in with her in the first place was to help support her mental health. Ralph finds his mom, and he kind of calls out to Abby and tells her to call the police, and Ralph's mom has slit her wrists. After Abby calls the police and she's waiting, and they're waiting for them to get there, Ralph's mom, who's named Laura, she sees Laura's ring still on her finger, and kind of in like this blind panic, she grabs it off of her finger and it's stuck, and so she just keeps pulling and pulling and finally like wrenches it off right when everybody gets there and pockets it. She just immediately feels so guilty about stealing this ring, but she is kind of trying to justify it to herself. She and Ralph end up going to the hospital, and they're ultimately unable to save his mother. While Abby is away for a moment in the waiting room, somebody goes up and hands Ralph a business card that says something ominous like, "Want to know why?" And so on the way out of the hospital, Ralph asks if they can go to the location on the business card and figure out why. And so they go to the ATM, they pull up to the building, and then they just sit there, and Ralph decides that he just wants to go home. Abby and Ralph go home. And over the course of the next few days, Abby is really, she's really like, just kind of ready for Ralph to move on immediately. Every day she basically wakes up and goes to sleep thinking, well, tomorrow Ralph will be better and he'll be over it. Abby and Ralph's mom had like a horrible dynamic. Laura was just always undermining her and didn't think that she was good enough for Ralph. Ralph would kind of, appease his mom, but was like ultimately always on Abby's side. So Ralph really starts falling into his depression, and Abby doesn't know what to do. She's trying to feed him, which is kind of, it seems like her way of showing love. She's been making like lots of dinners and stuff, but he's not touching anything that she's making. First day after Abby comes back home from work, she sees the curtains being closed in the same way the mother-in-law would, where she would pull them super tight and kind of scrunch them all the way down. And so she thinks that Ralph is doing this kind of thing, remembering his mother, but when she goes inside, he's actually in the basement, and he's whispering in the basement. When he comes up, he's like, "Let's go out for dinner," and he's kind of in a more cheerful mood, but he has a big cut on his hand, so what's that about? They go out to dinner, he eats tons of food, but then he discloses to her that he says that his mother is in the basement, and he doesn't know why or how. She's kind of fuzzy, like there's radio static or something, but that he talked to her all day. And Abby doesn't believe him at all. They end up going home, and he makes her go in the basement, and they turn out the light and close the door, see if Abby can see Laura. And Abby doesn't see Laura, but she definitely senses something is there, and she becomes terrified and runs upstairs. She's like, "I'm sorry, Ralph, you're right, she is still there." But she had been drinking the night before, and so the next morning she's sober, and she's like, "I don't actually believe it." Abby's main goal in the book is trying to pull Ralph out of this depression and just kind of move on with their lives. She's ready to have a baby. The book is called Motherthing, and the concept is that Abby has this idea that there are mothers and then there are mother things. And Laura is a mother thing for Ralph because, she wasn't good enough, basically. She was, in Abby's opinion and in Ralph's opinion, she was a very bad mother. And Abby also considers her mother to be a mother thing, because of how she was treated. Her mom was divorced and kind of like brought lots of men into the house, and this had like a really bad effect on Abby. Abby wants to be the perfect mother. She wants to be the perfect wife, and she wants to be the perfect mother, and that's like ultimately the goal that she's striving for throughout this book, really with the intention of undoing and moving past the issues that both Abby and Ralph have had with their mothers. I rated this book a 5 stars. This book is so funny and kind of quick-witted and fast-paced. Abby was just such an interesting character. She is somebody who is kind of incredibly selfish and selfless at the same time. You know, somebody who will really give herself to the people that she loves, but also is expecting things back from them that aren't totally reasonable. Abby has this fascination with this cookbook that she owns. It's like a really practical book, and she kind of thinks if she can follow this book to a T, that she can be the perfect mother, and that she can be better than Laura and so amazing that Ralph will realize they're so much better without her, and that they're gonna have a baby together, and she's not gonna be a mother thing, she's gonna be a real mother. The last book that I want to talk about is Luster by Raven Leilani, and this actually does not have any magical realism. It is pretty like classic litfic about this woman named, I think it's Edie. This main character, Edie, is a young woman. I think she's like 23. She works at like a magazine company in New York. Her like main character trait is that she's really promiscuous, and in fact, it gets her fired from her job. She ends up in a situation. She's been dating this man, Eric, and Eric is actually married and in an open relationship with his wife, Rebecca. Rebecca doesn't know Edie very well at all at this point, but finds out that she lost her job and offers for her to stay at their place for a while. And Eric is actually out of town for a few weeks. There's kind of a hidden condition to this, and the hidden condition is that Edie works to bond with Eric and Rebecca's adoptive daughter, Akilah. Eric and Rebecca are both white, and Akilah is black. Edie is also black. They're just wanting her to kind of provide emotional support and the kind of advice on the kind of issues that Akilah is dealing with. Edie and Akilah start bonding. Edie and Rebecca kind of start bonding separately, and then one day Eric comes back into town and he's like, what the heck is going on here? I ended up giving this book a 3 stars. I really liked the characters. I think that was really the strong point of this book. Not Eric. I think the problem was that anytime Eric was on screen, that I was like so unhappy, and I was just so unhappy, and all of the other characters were so unhappy. He's just such like a wrench in the gear for me. But Edie, our main character, and then Eric's wife, Rebecca, and their daughter, Akilah, were super interesting, and they had really interesting dynamics together. Edie and Akilah kind of start, building this friendship. Akilah is, I don't know if I said, but Akilah is 12 years old, and she's just basically telling Edie, like, I just don't want you to, like, ruin this for me. Like, I know that things that aren't perfect here, but they could be a lot worse, and they've been a lot worse. Akilah is also a, like, Doctor Who Cartoon Network type of nerd, and I think that's really funny. As far as Edie and Rebecca go, Edie is a artist, but she has been denied multiple times by her magazine company to work in an art position because of her quality of figure drawing, basically. And Rebecca happens to be, she works in like a morgue, or she gives autopsies. I'm not really sure. But at one point she sees Edie's art, and she basically like silently takes her to her work, sets up a canvas in the room, and has Edie paint. The thing that I didn't like about this book is I wish that we had more focus on Edie, Rebecca, and Akila rather than focusing on Eric. And for the first hour or two of the book, we don't get into any of that, and we're just following Edie around with her being a complete mess. I really didn't start enjoying the book until like hour 2 or 3, and so that's why I ended up rating this a 3-star. Those are some of the books that I've been reading in the last couple months, specifically Nightbitch and Motherthing. Those were by far my favorites. I thought that the characters were so fun and unique. I think next video I'm going to be talking about a few fantasy series that I've been reading. So thanks for watching. Bye! Natural Beauty, Nightbitch, Mary. Did I read these in alphabetical order? A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I, J, K, L.